She looked at you like a mirror cracked itself. No scream, no sorrow, just that final glance, the kind that slices without motion, a blade made of silence. You stood there holding her apologies, but they were all addressed to someone else. The words she used weren't hers anymore. They were masks passed down, coded scripts, ancient instincts in feminine flesh. You watched her rearrange the narrative, and she did it so smoothly, you began to doubt your own memories. You think you lost her, but what you really lost was the illusion that she ever saw you not as a dream, not as a wound to mother, not as an echo of her father's absence. And now, in the void where blame was supposed to land, there's only the soft shimmer of myth, the Eve who weeps, but walks away untouched. If this whisper already knows, you let it echo. Like the video. Leave your shadow in the comments. Subscribe, and stay near the silence. She never began with you. She arrived mid-story, haunted by patterns that weren't yours to solve. You met her long after she had buried the first version of herself. The one who once believed men could be gentle gods, and not the returning shadows of absent kings. You met her after she learned to dress her tenderness in armor, when her laughter became a performance measured not by joy, but by how little it revealed. She smiled like a woman on trial, every gesture curated, rehearsed, as if you might be her next interrogator, and you didn't notice, not at first. You mistook her eyes for wonder, but they were scanning you like a battlefield for signs, for flaws, for the moment the betrayal would begin. You thought the story began with hello, but she was already in chapter 7. You were not the first man, you were the first man after. You remember the moment she flinched when you were kind, that twitch, that microsecond of mistrust. You didn't hurt her, but someone did. And so she mapped your kindness onto the memory of someone who twisted softness into control. She braced herself before you even reached out. You were trying to love her, she was trying to survive you. And when she told you she had walls, you believed her. But those walls were not boundaries. They were murals, painted with every face that hurt her. And the longer you stayed, the more she confused your presence with prediction. You didn't notice the ghost at the table, the phantom of the ex she never named but always referenced, not in words, but in tone. The emotional calculus she ran when you were 2 minutes late. The tension in her silence when your answers weren't poetic enough. You weren't disappointing her. You were failing a test designed by a past you never lived. A trial where every man before you became one man. And now you were him. You loved her earnestly. She loved you cautiously, strategically, as if playing chess against fate. There was a rhythm to her stories. Men who couldn't hold her, men who misunderstood her, men who wanted too much, men who wanted too little, and always. She stood apart, radiant, wounded, misunderstood. She cast herself as the constant in a rotating storm of failed masculinity. But you never heard her speak of guilt. Not once. Not a single moment where she wondered if perhaps her patterns were not punishment, but participation. She was always the survivor, never the cause. You wanted to believe you were different. You tried to be. You overcompensated. You explained yourself even when she didn't ask. You apologized preemptively, shrank your voice, made yourself gentle to the point of erasure. You thought if you made her feel safe enough, she would drop the mask. But what you forgot was this. The mask is the safety. The character she became was not a disguise. It was the only self that survived. You weren't speaking to a woman. You were speaking to an archetype she constructed to avoid feeling like a child again. She blamed you for the mood she brought with her. You saw it. That day she arrived, already distant. You hadn't done anything wrong, but she searched your face for evidence that you might. She was bracing for betrayal like a dog waiting for a thunderclap, And when you tried to reassure her, she recoiled. Not because of you, but because reassurance had always come with conditions, with guilt, with control. So she turned your kindness into manipulation. She twisted your honesty into strategy, and she walked away holding the narrative not as truth, but as protection. You remember her last message? The words sounded rational, mature. I just need time. I think we're in different places. You're a good man. But beneath those words, something colder pulsed, not grief calculation. She was already writing the version of events where she was the one who had to leave, who saw the signs, who chose peace. You felt it, that subtle rewriting, that quiet edit to your reality. Suddenly, your love became too much. Your care became control. Your stability became pressure. She transmuted the facts, not with lies, but with symbols, because she never argued with details. She rewrote the emotional truth. She made you feel like a danger to her freedom just by existing. And in that inversion, you began to wonder if you had done something wrong. That was the spell. Not anger, not accusation, but confusion. The deepest kind, where your own memories turn against you, where your own kindness becomes suspect, where you begin to narrate her myth instead of your truth. What you didn't see was this: you were chosen not because you were guilty, but because you were safe. Safe enough to blame, safe enough to unload the weight of a past she never dared confront. You were the canvas for her unspoken rage, the projection screen for all the men who vanished, who violated, who silenced. And in a way, that's why she trusted you not to hold her, but to absorb her shadow. But she couldn't say it. She couldn't say, I'm terrified of needing someone who doesn't need me. She couldn't say, I've been hurt by men who never asked what they broke. So she said nothing. She withdrew. She packed her absence in dignity and disappeared. And you, left behind, sorted through the ruins trying to find the mistake. But there was no mistake. There was only the wound she never showed you. You weren't her beginning, you were her ritual, a repetition wrapped in the illusion of romance, a trial that ends not with truth, but with closure, the kind she controls. And so she left, not with anger, but with clean hands. Hands that never had to admit they once pulled you close, not out of love, but out of need, out of fear, out of habit. You saw her again once, maybe online, maybe in person. She looked untouched, not happy, not grieving, just clean. Like she had washed you off the way a dream dissolves after waking, and you realized something strange. She never asked what happened to you, not once. She vanished from your life like a myth corrects itself, and in doing so, she returned to the archetype she always worshipped, the woman who walks away, not because she's cruel, but because she's wiser now. But you still remember the night she cried in your arms, the way her voice trembled when she spoke about her mother, the way she clung to you like a child lost in a burning house. That moment was real. That pain was real. But to hold that pain meant she would have to admit vulnerability. And to admit vulnerability meant surrendering the myth. So she chose the cleaner ending. She chose to become a symbol. You are not her enemy. You were her mirror. And the moment you reflected something too honest, too present, too intimate, she smashed the glass. Not to hurt you, but to forget herself. Every accusation she made was a confession in disguise, but spoken or in the language of myth, not guilt. You didn't realize at first that her accusations were scripts, that each time she said you don't really see me, she was offering a confession, not a critique. It wasn't you who couldn't see her, it was she who no longer knew what was real. Her truth had been spliced and rethreaded through 1,000 imagined betrayals, not by you, but by those who came before, and the stories she read late at night, and the mother who taught her how to weaponize restraint. So when she accused you of being distant, it was because she had already begun withdrawing, dressing up her departure in preemptive blame. When she called you controlling, it was because she resented the way your presence made her feel vulnerable. When she told you you're not listening, it wasn't because you failed to hear her, it was because she could no longer listen to herself without unraveling. She wore each mask with elegance, precision, not to deceive you, but to survive you. Not the real you, but the imagined one, the archetype you triggered simply by being close, attentive, and firm. She became what she needed to be in order to remain in control of her own chaos. The cool girl, the wounded bird, the strong, independent woman who doesn't need anyone, each role performed with the silent hope that you would believe her, that you would never ask what hid behind the curtain. And the more earnestly you searched for the real her, the more her performance intensified, because if you ever saw past it, the illusion would shatter. And then what she would have to admit, she's been building her life not on love, but on defense. There was a moment, you remember it, when she cried, not because she was sad, but because her story was beginning to crack. You held her and she told you a half memory about her father, something about the silence he left behind. And then she paused. Her breath caught, and you saw it, the little girl beneath the adult language. Not manipulative, not cruel, just terrified of being seen too clearly, terrified of no longer having anyone to blame once the mask dropped. You asked her once, "Why do you always assume the worst?" and she didn't answer, not with words. She turned away and changed the subject, because that question sliced deeper than she was willing to go. To answer it would mean admitting she had built her sense of self on a mythology of injustice, that she was the perennial wronged one, the misunderstood heroine, the one whose heart was too big for this brutal world. And you disrupted the plotline. You didn't betray her, you didn't manipulate her, you simply stayed. And by staying, you became intolerable. Because only monsters are supposed to stay too long in a fairy tale, not real men. She accused you of things you never did, not loudly, not maliciously, but in passing, in tone, in vague references. You're just like the others. You're starting to feel distant. This is why I don't trust anyone. And though your words and actions didn't match these accusations, they landed anyway. Because they weren't about truth. They were about the preservation of identity. Her identity. If you were kind, she couldn't be the survivor. If you were patient, she couldn't be the escape artist. If you loved her without condition, then she would have to confront the part of her that never believed she deserved love to begin with. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She reversed the mirror. She looked at your steadiness and labeled it obsession. She looked at your desire and called it pressure. She took your devotion and named it a red flag. And in doing so, she preserved the only narrative that made her feel safe. It's not me, it's him. You began to feel guilty for things that weren't yours. You overanalyzed your tone, your timing, your smallest gestures. You walked on eggshells not because she demanded it, but because her silence implied that anything could be misinterpreted. You were not loving her, you were translating her fear, and every time you offered clarity, she became more vague. Every time you stood still, she accused you of drifting. She couldn't say what she wanted because she didn't know. And worse, she was afraid that knowing would undo her. There were nights when she held you too tightly, when she clung to you like she was afraid of herself. But by morning, she became cold again, distant, rational. She would talk about boundaries and needing space, and you felt like a ghost, a dream she tried to suppress. You saw in her eyes not absence, but erasure the kind that happens when someone begins rewriting the story while you're still living it. You were the mirror she could not control, and mirrors, to those who wear masks, are crueler than knives. They do not wound, they expose. They show the cracks. They speak the truth she cannot narrate. And so, she did what all mask wearers must eventually do. She turned the mirror into the villain. She made you the reason she couldn't breathe. She made your loyalty into suffocation. She rewrote the script so that her escape could feel like empowerment, not avoidance, not fear, but strength. And maybe that's what hurts most. Not that she left, but that she left while wearing your face as her armor. She walked into the next chapter with your essence distorted, and the people around her, they'll believe her. They'll nod when she says he was too intense. They'll offer comfort when she says, I just felt unseen, and none of them will ask what she refused to face, that perhaps she wasn't escaping you, but the truth you held too still, too long, too close. You see, her accusations were never really about you. They were rituals, defensive invocations spoken to ward off intimacy, and when they failed to drive you away, they evolved. She became subtler, softer, but the masks remained. You were not speaking to a woman, you were speaking to an archetype wrapped in just enough flesh to seem real, and she wore it beautifully, convincingly, until the moment your silence made her question her own. You never got closure, because she didn't want one. Closure is a mirror, it requires looking back, and she was already rewriting, already recasting, already vanishing into the next version of herself. But the mask, it remained, and maybe it always will, because it fits too well now. It knows how to smile, it knows how to cry, it knows how to say all the right words at all the wrong times, and it knows how to walk away with clean hands. But you remember the pauses, the glitches in the performance, the way her eyes betrayed her story, the way her body leaned toward you before her voice pushed you away. Those were the moments she forgot the script. Those were the moments you met the real her. And that's why it still haunts you. Not because she lied, but because for a moment, she didn't. You were never the villain. You were the silence she couldn't bear, the mirror she tried to break, and the truth she almost saw. She disappears with dignity because she made you carry her chaos and convinced you it was yours. You sit in the aftermath, but the fire was never yours. The ruin smells like your fault, looks like your hesitation, sounds like your silence, but it wasn't. It never was. She left her chaos folded neatly in your hands, like a note with no name. And because you loved her, you read it. You believed the mess was a map. You tried to clean it, to understand it, to redeem her narrative by taking the blame she left unsaid. But it was a trick, ancient and beautiful, the disappearing act of a woman who learned long ago that if she can make you believe it's your storm, she never has to get wet. She exits like a priestess, calm, rehearsed, sacred, no slam doors, no shouting, just a gaze so composed it makes you question every memory. She doesn't attack, she rewrites, and you let her, because she doesn't scream. She sighs. She speaks in soft indictments that don't sting until days later. She says things like, I just couldn't feel safe with you. And you think about all the times you made her tea, waited for her walls to lower, gave her space, asked her questions you already knew the answers to just to make her feel seen. Still, she leaves that final sentence hanging in the air, and you swallow it like a verdict. Her safety, your failure. She doesn't accuse you directly. No, that would be too obvious, too crude. Instead, she hints, I'm not saying it's your fault. I just felt alone sometimes. And in that ellipsis, you hang yourself. Because if she never says what you did, you can never prove you didn't do it. You're left in a courtroom where the charges are spiritual, the evidence emotional, the witness herself, and the judge already gone. She walks away untouched because she leaves with the role of victim intact, not out of malice, but ritual. She doesn't know how to exit without becoming the one who was wronged, not consciously, but her identity clings to that story. It's the one that keeps her from drowning in self-reproach. She needs you to be the shadow so she can return to the light. And if you protest, you only reinforce the role she cast you in. The bitter man, the defensive one. The guiltier you feel, the cleaner she becomes. You ask yourself questions that have no answer. Was I too intense, too soft, too honest, not honest enough? You begin editing your own past, wondering which version is true, and in that confusion, she becomes larger than life. Her silence gains weight. Her absence becomes proof of your damage. She becomes the one that got away, but also the one who made you question whether you were ever whole to begin with. You replay the breakup like a crime scene, looking for fingerprints. You remember her last words, her last look, but you don't realize that she had been disappearing long before she left. She was already rewriting you in her mind, slowly, gracefully, like a painter replacing one image with another, stroke by invisible stroke. The man she once adored became the man she couldn't quite understand. The joy she once felt became too much too fast. The safety you gave her became something suffocating, and you stood still while the world shifted beneath your feet. She doesn't explain because she doesn't need to. The narrative was never built on logic. It was emotional myth-making, archetype weaving. She is not just a woman, she is the one who outgrew you. And to outgrow you, she first had to shrink you, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. She needed a reason to leave that wasn't her fear, her projection, her trauma. And so, she made one. She placed it on you like a crown of shame, and she smiled while doing it. Your name will echo in her next story, but not as you are, as you were made to be. She'll tell her friends that you were sweet but intense, attentive but somehow too much. She'll say she tried, but something in you felt off. She won't say what, because she doesn't know. The truth is too uncomfortable that she couldn't tolerate being loved without a script, that your presence made her masks itch, that her soul began to stir in ways she didn't ask for. So she called it chaos, and then handed the blame to you, and you accepted it, because blame is easier than mystery. If you did something wrong, at least there's something to fix. But if you didn't, then what you lost wasn't just her, but your grip on reality. You would rather wear her mistakes than admit you were erased. Not left, not betrayed, just rewritten. Made into a symbol of a story that never belonged to you. And that is the deeper loss, not her body, not her presence, but your place in the truth. Even now, you defend her in your mind. You say things like, she was just scared. She meant well. She didn't know what she was doing. But that's the seduction, the quiet genius of her exit. She planted the seed of your own guilt and walked away before it grew roots. And now, every time you question it, you find yourself apologizing to a ghost. You still carry her feelings like unpaid debts, still wonder if you could have softened more, asked less, stayed silent just a little longer. But the truth was never about what you did, it was about what you represented. A mirror too clear, a hand too steady, a gaze that didn't blink. She needed someone who could hold the fantasy, not the truth. And you shattered that fantasy simply by being real. So she turned the mirror, You became the imbalance, and she, the one who had no choice. And maybe that's the cruelest beauty of it, that she leaves with dignity not because she earned it, but because she gifted you the shame. It's not a scream, but a whisper, I'm doing what's best for me. You'll understand someday. And in that silence, you drown, because the story feels closed, sealed, complete. But the wound is wide open. You will heal, but not by making sense of it. There is no sense, only pattern. You were not her lesson, you were her release, her clean break, her sacred ending. And in that role, you were erased. You were needed not as a person, but as a threshold. She walked over you to prove to herself that she could, and yet, somewhere, deep inside her, the memory of you still flickers, not in shame, not in anger, but in quiet knowledge, the kind that comes at night, when her masks slip, and her myth falters, the kind that whispers he didn't deserve the ending I gave him. But she will not say it, she cannot, because to admit it would require going back, and she is not built for return, only for departure. You will not get the apology, not because she doesn't regret, but because regret would shatter her illusion, and she needs the illusion more than she ever needed you. But you get something rarer. You get the truth, not as she told it, but as you lived it. You carry the reality that her dignity was not a light, it was a disguise, and that your shame was not guilt, it was the weight of her unfinished story. Let that truth free you, not with bitterness, but with clarity. There's a staircase in her mind where your name still echoes, not in the rooms where she laughs, but in the hallways she avoids. A door she never opens, a mirror she never dares to wipe clean, because the moment she does, your face will return, not angry, not broken, just watching, quiet as the truth, and she will close the door again, not because she's cruel, but because she's not ready to remember the man who never blamed her. And you will walk forward, not healed, but unhaunted, because the blame never belonged to you. It was a mask she wore when she needed to feel powerful. And now, finally, it falls.